Next speaker we have is Harsh with us. He'll be talking about passion, Python and proprietary stories from Sarkar. Talking about Harsh, Harsh has been working as a technologist within the Indian government for more than 8 years as of now. He has worked as a data scientist across domains such as rural skills and roads before starting and leading the ministry's first interdisciplinary data and insights unit. Currently, he is an advisor at NHAI. His work focuses on weaving emerging technologies within the life cycles of highways from construction to traffic management. There is a lot to talk about, Harsh. So, give it a huge round of applause for Harsh. Thank you. The stage is all yours.
Thanks. Just before I start, I was thinking of getting a tattoo of my dog, but I think Bruno, like naming your open source project tops it. I think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to talk about how we've been using open source within the government and how it has been helping through the bunch of projects where it played a key role. My background is my entry into open source was back in college with GSOC, and since then I've had my own Python library, which is largely unattended right now, and I've been trying to use open source as much as I can at work as well. And a lot of data science, I think it was also mentioned in the last, yesterday in the panel that data science was primarily FOSS, right? If you skip the last few years, everything before it was FOSS by default. And that still holds true for the kind of work which we do. So this is a month ago. This is this is years after we've set the first data science team. We've done a bunch of these projects. It's been largely successful. I've been invited to another ministry by a bureaucrat to brainstorm how we can set up a team in that particular ministry, right? And the topic of discussion was what tools do we need, right, to set up a data science unit in the ministry, right? It wasn't about what people, what processes, etc. It was a huge conference room with a bunch of people, and it was a discussion on the tools which are prerequisite to do anything like that. Right, so someone suggested BI tools, some proprietary warehousing solutions, auto ML suits or whatever. Like the general bad advice went around, and then when my turn came, my answer was literally you just need good people, a laptop, and some good problem statements, right? You don't need to pay more than that to do the kind of work which you have to do. And then to validate this statement, in that presentation, we went through a bunch of these projects which we've done, and all we needed was public-spirited people who knew Python. That's it, to do those projects. And so I'm going to do, in the same vein, some of those projects here, go through them and to give a sense of what was the stack which was used, and then follow up with some reflections on how internally we've seen open source within the government, in my own capacity, not government. Right, and so as I said, the beauty of data science is that it's primarily open source. Scoping problems is a harder statement, but this doesn't bode well with all the hype, right? With the hype, people want to make money out of it. So people are selling tools, people are selling these custom proprietary solutions or whatever, but you don't really need those. So let's take a look at some of the projects, right? So this is the project which I had spoken about 2 years ago at FOSS also. This is rural road planning. So I'll not go into details of a lot of these projects. You can find more information about them, and I'll give you a few links, but I'll primarily want to focus on just the high level of it. So this is for Ministry of Rural Development. The objective is we need to identify 125,000 kilometers of roads which we can spend money on to upgrade, right? And the pool is 40 lakh kilometers. It's a massive, like we have 40 lakh rural roads. How do you select 2% of it? In a way that it boosts educational, agricultural, and health outcomes. And so there's a process, a bottom-up process where where local MLAs, MPs, Gram Panchayat, they think of which roads need to be built, and it percolates up. And there's often this is prone to elite capture, right? So we were thinking whether there is a data-driven solution which can support this process, not override it, but support it. And so the solution was a network analysis algorithm. So if you take every habitation's location in India, every rural habitation, so let's say 10 lakh rural habitations, and you have the destination, school, hospitals, and markets, and you have the road network. So you do an optimization algorithm, simple Dijkstra's algorithm, which I know many of you would have done in your college. From every habitation, go to the nearest school, hospital, repeat it for all 10 lakh habitations, get those maps, superimpose them on each other, and then you get a weight for every edge of this network, and the thicker the edge, the more this road is used, then you check whether this road is in a bad condition and invest it. So this is a very high level. Obviously, to weave it within the government thing, it took a lot of time, and there's a lot more to this. But the outcome was 70% of the roads for this 80,000 crore government program were the roads which were recommended by the algorithm, right? And if you want to understand more details on this, you can search GIS planning, IndiaFOSS, and there's a talk from 2 years ago where you can see the details of it. There's a stack, all of this, a massive program, we've run it for 3 years. The stack is as simple as this. The network analysis algorithm was QGIS 2. I should have done 3. It was a legacy, stupid decision. I started with 2, then I stuck with 2. A PyQGIS script which ran and created maps like the ones on right, which is color-coded with the thickness of the edge and which is easily digestible by civil engineers. The data which we used, and I'll talk about data also other than just the stack, because there is also this notion of open and closed data. And so we had an internal GIS network. We know every road, every habitation, etc., which we have now open sourced, right? So if you Google GeoSarak open data, you can download these 10 lakh habitations, you can download the entire road network, etc., and you can pretty much do the same thing which we did. For a lot of the analytical solutions and also while making the map and cleaning the network and the topology, we used GRASS, which also comes packaged with QGIS. There was a web part of it also, not just the map, and that was powered by OSM for the base and open layers for the editing, etc. So this was the stack which powered all of it. There was nothing proprietary in the entirety of the solution, built in-house over a period of 6 months and then deployed over a period of 3 years. This is another project, Unmapped Habitations. So as I said, we started with 10 lakh habitations, but we have our internal estimates that we have 16 lakh habitations, right? So how do you find those, right? Again, is there a way to support ground units that these are also habitations which you have missed? Habitations are smaller units than villages. If you think about it, if there's a settlement of a few huts now starting living together, that can be called a habitation. And they come up organically over time. And so the last survey we had was, say, 20 years ago, and that was 10 lakh. And so a lot has happened in the 20 years. So how do you find them? So we again tried to see there's a top-down data-driven approach. So what we did was there are a bunch of these open data sets. One is by Facebook, one which has released population density rasters for 15 by 15 centimeters for the entirety of the world. And then you have Global Health Settlement Layer, GSSL, which can also be downloaded and they give you polygons. So we took a lot of that. We ran our own clustering algorithms on it. We added trust score to the habitations if any other government program has reached there, say a NREGA or an Awas Yojana. And then we again created maps, sent it for desk verification. Again, a very complex project, which I'm skipping over the details of it. But again, mostly open source data. So we had 10 lakh, we identified 9 lakh more. A lot of false positives because brick kilns and solar farms would also get tagged by the machine learning algorithms. We added our own custom score, trust score to it and reduced it to 3,50,000. And then we had a desk verification round where people are just looking at it and saying, this is not a village, this is something else. So we have 1 lakh left and that's currently being verified on the field. Whatever comes out of it will, if unconnected without a road, will be provided a road in a new government program which has been launched a few months ago. So this is like generally the process. If you see the points are from our government programs, the dots which we've clustered. The boundary is generated by clustering the Facebook open population dataset, and like this is the larger process. So again, the stack being fully open, right? To do all of this, one would imagine, oh, you need to buy your own satellite imagery, blah, blah, blah. None of it. All of this purely on an open stack. GHSL, Facebook population density maps, GeoPandas for a bunch of GIS stuff, sklearn, we spun up our own clustering algorithm for our purposes. Some internal government data, and there's a lesson here which I'll talk about later. It's hard for government to also get access to government data. We use GeoSarak, which is open layers, and a bunch of it with PostGIS, and again QGIS. All of it open source. We've identified 100, like a lakh habitations, probably say 25% of them don't have roads now and will potentially get roads because of this exercise. Let me see the time. Right, so there's another project. I skip over it, the same spiel. This is for national highways. This is from my current place. We have toilets on national highways, right, on toll plazas, etc., but they're not clean. Nobody uses them because they're not clean. So we didn't even know how many we had to begin with. So we had an existing app. We said, let's do a baseline survey. Let's figure out how many do we have. So we figured out we have 1,100 and something. And then we said, okay, every day someone takes a photo after cleaning. So there is already a manual process, right? Someone is going there and cleaning them, and they have a paper behind the door where they tick mark who is the person who cleaned it today. You sort of digitize this process, click photos of it, but you don't have, no one should be seeing these photos, right, on a day-to-day basis. And so the idea was we created a machine learning model which figures out whether the image is clean or not, and only the unclean toilets are then flagged to the superiors, to the toll plaza manager, and then upper. And so this happens. So 1173 toll blocks, 60% on average get inspected every day, the 40% are not. In the 60%, 2 to 5% of them are getting marked as unclean. Our data science team was trying to figure out what is the pattern, is the machine learning really helping, something was flagged as unclean, did it become clean? But the answer is no. What is unclean is in the remaining 40% which doesn't get inspected. So the whole idea is if someone is inspecting and clicking a photograph, they've cleaned it and uploaded it. And the machine learning is sort of just like a thing which is making this project look attractive. But the whole idea is that now you do inspections. The 40% which are not doing are unclean, and the idea is to improve the number of inspections. Again, the stack is Meta's segment anything model to like bring down, differentiate the wall and all of it, because we have different weights for cleanliness for all of it. Then OpenCV for stain detection, not machine learning, simple custom vision, computer vision. Internal data, Colab, Fast API, open source stack, right? Now this is another project, DroneAI. Again with NHAI, NHAI builds highways and maintains them. We had drone videos which we were collecting on a monthly basis, but we were not putting them to use because it's clunky, right? Like they're 100 kilometers, a particular highway stretch would be 100 kilometers, a video for it would go for 2 to 3 hours. The idea for this video is to get analytics out of it, right? Where are the cracks, where are the potholes, etc. But the video was just used as a proof if something goes wrong in the future, go and look at the video. But it wasn't being used the way it should be. So that was the problem statement. So we did a pilot. Incidentally, the startup is also here. I didn't realize. We did a pilot with a startup. We took drone photos. So instead of taking a video at a 45-degree angle, and this is very cool, so I'll also go into a demo of it. Entirety of it is possible with an open source manner. You take photos at a 90-degree angle, and you take it with a few overlaps, and then you reconstruct it in a ortho-rectified manner. And so now, instead of applying computer vision on just RGB, you can apply computer vision on RGB plus a depth, a relative depth, which improves signal for your machine learning models. So from pilots, finalizing KPIs, road maintenance, under construction, counting trees, etc., public procurement, fine-tuning models, MVP and policy changes, took 2 years. That's where we are right now. We are now going to roll out in a phased manner. I'll quickly show what it means. So this is how a drone video, if this is the drone, right? It's running and it's clicking pictures, and this is what you would get, right? But you want to do machine learning on it in a manner in which you can find things and also geo-reference them back. And that's how satellites also work. If you think about Google Earth, you have like a stitched imagery, which has been clicked by a satellite, but now you try to do it with drones. And so this is what done, and they run a suite of algorithms, and the broader technology is photogrammetry, and you can do all of this open source. And so you stitch the photos and you come up with something like this, right? And now this is geo-referenced, because now I can go to a particular part of this ortho-rectified imagery. Instead of jumping 1 hour in a video, you can now jump to a particular location on it, and you can run analytics on it. So for example, if we it loaded. And so if you want to see where the cracks are, so you can click, a crack is the term for roads, not otherwise, but so you can figure out where the cracks are, right? And so this is machine learning, but instead of doing it on videos, you do it on photogrammetry images. Now the fun part of it, and we can go on about this project, the fun part of this project is that it is a bunch of these small open source tools which have been stitched together, right? And this is an example of a project which is being done through vendor. And that's when you see like a lot of these open source technologies being used. The projects before, I was talking about the projects we've done through an internal team. It's a lean team, you can do what you can do. But now when you think of more complex projects, you can see the bunch of tools which are being used. And you can do it yourself as well, right? If you have a drone, or even without a drone, now you can do this with your normal camera phone, click something in different angles and then try to construct it in a 3D manner. But a bunch of these things, all open source, which is powering this, and which has also brought the cost down. Like to do something like that, and the codes which you used to have, and the codes which we have now to do something like that per kilometer is drastically different. Then going to, also just shout out because they're here. We have two startups. One of them is DroneAI Maps, and they're also hiring. So if you're interested, that's her. There's NREGA-AI. I'll quickly talk about this project because I want to jump to open data. NREGA-AI is another project. NREGA is one of the largest welfare programs in the world, in which any household in rural India can claim 100 days of employment from the government, and the government says, okay, fine, I'll give you a wage per day, and you have to build a school or a house or do some land development work. So do something which helps the village, and the government pays you for it, and every rural household is entitled for 100 days of it. There's a lot of suspicious activities also which happen at times that the same asset is billed multiple times and things like that. And so we were trying to build an algorithm which sort of puts a risk score on each of these assets. And every month, at the start of the month, we'll run a bunch of these rules, come up with a risk score, and then for that month, inspections will be prioritized on those assets. Right? We have I think 70 lakh assets ongoing at the same time. You can't inspect all. So you want to figure out a small pool of it, you prioritize inspection. So that's the thing. We have some GIS with some machine learning. 10% of them on an average get marked as suspicious. And so this is the app. You can go smart recommendation system. You get a list of inspections you can do at a gram panchayat level, which the model thinks are suspicious. And for example, this one is supposed to be a cattle shelter which is being constructed, but you can see the pictures are not of a cattle shelter. So that's why it's suspicious. Again, GeoPandas, PostGIS, EfficientNet, which are also open models, right? So it's not open web stacks, open data analytics, open machine learning models, PyTorch for fine tuning, Postgres. And so now I want to go into open information. A lot of these projects which you're seeing are trying to identify fraud, right, in a top-down manner. But fraud is decentralized. Every village or every bad actor can do fraud in a way they want to do it. It's a custom thing, but when you're trying to stop it in a top-down manner, you sort of have to do vanilla approach. You can't be very specific about a particular kind of fraud or another particular kind of fraud, right? And it's a cat and mouse game. You'll do something, they'll come up with something new, and they'll inevitably win because they have so much more creativity and it's just more decentralized in that nature. And this is, has been always said in the FOSS and open data movement that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So in extension of open source software, information can be also thought of it, right? What is software? I used an open source software and I customize it for my needs, and that's the beauty of it. But that's the same approach with data. If you release information to the people who need it, they can use that information in a custom manner to stop or prevent fraud in the village which is happening. So you decentralize information, you give it to them, let them use the same data in a different manner versus you using the data in a particular vanilla manner to prevent fraud. So that's the idea of using open information to sort of prevent fraud in a decentralized manner. And I'll give you an example. So the same project, NREGA, we created, we had an app in which we added a module where any worker can put their job card and get a sense of where their money is stuck, what's happening in the village, etc. And there was such deep need for it that in 6 months of launching it, it has been used 2.3 crore times by people on the ground to identify what's happening. And it's powerful. And we are getting stories from the villages in which people are using this in different manners. So I'll just run one.
నా పేరు నందేల గిరిజ, గదబకరకవలస గ్రామం, కొత్తవలస పంచాయతీ, సాలూరు మండలం, పార్వతీపురం, మన్యం జిల్లా. నేను ఆదివాసీ ఆడపిల్లని. నేను ఆదివాసీ తెగల కోసం కొన్ని గ్రామాలను ఎంపిక చేసుకొని పనిచేయటం జరుగుతుంది. అందులో కొత్తవలస పంచాయతీలో ఎగుదాగరవలస గ్రామం నేను ఫీల్డ్కి వెళ్ళేటప్పుడు వాళ్ళు 6 వారాలుగా పని చేసేటప్పటికి కూడా వాళ్ళకి డబ్బులు ఎక్కడ పడుతున్నాయనే విషయం కూడా తెలియలేదు. నేను వెళ్ళిన తర్వాత మాకు 6 వారాల నుంచి పనికెళ్ళినా డబ్బులు పడట్లేదమ్మా అని అడగటంతో వాళ్ళ జాబ్ కార్డు తీసి ఈ జన్మన్రేగా యాప్లో చూసిన తర్వాత వాళ్ళకి పోస్టల్ అకౌంట్లో అమౌంట్ పడటంతో పలానా పోస్టల్ అకౌంట్లో పడింది మీరు వెళ్ళి తీసుకోవచ్చు అని చెప్పటంతో వాళ్ళు తీసుకొని తర్వాత మా
And so there are countless stories which are about us releasing the information, not knowing how it will be used, people on the ground using it creatively to solve problems, right? And that's the idea of FOSS also. And we have case studies in which money which has been credited into a particular bank account has been not accessible to the beneficiary for, say, 2 years. And like an amount of 40,000, and this is the most marginalized section, right? And because it went into a different bank account than the one they thought. There has been many bank accounts created in the digital push, and they didn't know which one it went to. And like someone, an intermediary, had the app, they could have also checked it, but they don't have smartphones. Someone checked it and helped them. And they got access to that 40,000. And it's a big deal. And this is not being done by us. We've released the information and people are using it as per their context. So that's an example of open information, which is just an extension and the same philosophy between FOSS. Some reflections, quickly I'll go through. For data science, I still think there's no need for proprietary tools. With the current LLM things, there's, sure, Llama's open, but it's not open in the sense that I can't spin it up the same way I can use efficient net or whatever. I need some compute, which is not not basic compute, right? So it's open still, thankfully, but not as much as like what the classical work has been till now. But there's a heavy reliance on open models, open data, open maps, open web stacks, as you could see. Imagine if for all the projects, if we had to spend proprietary on it, how much money we would have spent, right? And that's public money. And so thanks to FOSS, we are saving that. Government needs FOSS, save public money. It changes the ecosystem also, right? Right now, people are selling tools because there's incentive in selling tools. But if it's all FOSS, then the focus can come back to solving problems because there's not money to be made in the tools. It prevents vendor lock-in, it's obvious. It gives access to better talent, right? How many of you here are SQL Server developers? Do you use Stack in SQL Server, right? And how many use Postgres? Exactly, right? Now imagine the stack which we use is SQL Server. And so we don't get access to the best talent. And with open source, that also changes more and more. There's information asymmetry and all, I'll skip. But things are changing. It's not all bad. As you can see, we are also using a lot of open source projects. But as budgets are getting tightened, automatically we have to use open source if you're building internally. You can't keep buying SQL Server licenses, Windows licenses, etc. Also, when we are outsourcing tech, which is now more common, the startups themselves use a lot of open source, right? Their incentive is very clear. They have to do the job in the the lowest amount of money, because that's how procurement works. The lowest amount of money automatically becomes FOSS. Like the tools which I said for the drone projects, couldn't have imagined if we were doing it ourselves. But that's the power of markets, maybe. There's still some small tenders which keep mentioning MS SQL and enterprise GIS and all those things, just legacy. Someone just added a line, right? And there's an open source project which someone can pick up is you go through all these tenders which get published, you scan through them and find out whether they mention any proprietary software, and you can send a comment and they'll have to change it because there's a government policy which says you have to use open source software in the tender, or you have to give the option, right? So a simple project which can be taken up and can be scaled across the country. I think another thing which open source right now is a gap which can be filled is tooling. Like at the stack level, you're competing with a Microsoft or an Oracle, and they have a sales team which an OSS community does not have, right? But tooling is a place where even the proprietary solution providers are not interested in with the government because it's small ticket, right? And there's no fun in small ticket with the government where you're pushing so much to get like a browser stack for 10,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees or whatever. So the space for tooling is ripe for open source. And we do see a lot of free softwares being used, not necessarily open source when it comes to tooling. But here the problem is capacity and constraints, right? Technically, the government should be using, a lot of these teams do use version control, but it's not as common. So version control, CI/CD is not being used, session recording tools, any tools for creating mockups if you can't, like the government can't procure Figma or whatever. Like these places is where open source can really help with the government, but it won't just be a problem of going and pitching them. It'll be needing capacity building also, because these things, the approach to software development is not like this, which allows for this. So it's not, but I think this is a great place where tooling can infiltrate within the government from open source perspective. There's a lot of open washing also. What I said is built using open source, right? So I wouldn't say my projects are open. They're built using open source. But a lot of projects are said they're open. But what is open about them is something which we need to question as a community. Is the output open source itself? I haven't seen an example, and maybe I haven't seen enough, an example of an open source government project where someone in the community, not connected to anyone, has sent a change request and it's got approved. That example is yet to be seen, at least in my understanding. There are open standards, but there's no open processes to change those standards. There are open APIs, but to get access to that API, you need to know someone or be a big company. Open source can also lead to a lock-in. I know an example of a ministry which has built something through an open source project, but there's no community around it. So there's like a vendor who made an open source project, made the government use it, and that's it. But there's, I think, a lot of wins with open data, and that should continue. Thanks. A bunch of what I was talking about, there's writing, which you can see. If you're interested in working for the government or volunteering, that's the QR code. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Thank you for the great talk. You've done some wonderful work. So about the open information part, I see you've done stuff at the central government level, but I wonder at like a local government level, do you see things changing at like a policy level to mandate local government bodies to publish open data? Because at least in Bangalore, if I want to get a bus from here to the railway station or to the airport, there's no straightforward way for me to get the information, and I'll probably have to use Google Maps because there's no open data about it. So do you see like a policy change happening?
I think I've seen a lot of the state initiatives also. So at the central government level, there's a policy, government open data license, which says that the government can release data without liability, etc., which many state governments also use. I've seen a lot of state governments and city governments releasing data much more proactively also. I can comment on this particularly, maybe I can't comment, but I remember I read it recently that the Bangalore government was doing like a data hackathon with the transit data. But I don't know how open was it and how open it wasn't. I think you know.
So I was involved with that.
Yeah.
You had to sign up, get approved by the certain government bodies, and then you get static data. And only 2 companies got the real-time data.
Makes sense. And so that needs to change. I think the concept of what is considered data and what can be built around it. I think Delhi government also was trying to release real-time GTFS data. And that's changing. I think Surat smart city government does something. I think the movement is changing, and there's a lot of local activism. So the communities which you probably, I think you would already know, Data Meet and then Civic Data Lab as an organization, a lot of them are doing a lot of work. I wouldn't have a value judgment on whether the central government or the state government or city government is doing much better. I always think that the cities and the states have much more innovation happening. But you're right, and I think the demand should be to change the definition of what is the data, not static. Give us, yeah.
Hey, hi. This was very interesting talk. I wanted to understand, like, when you were talking about tenders, in my understanding, usually, like, the bigger tenders are gone through, like, MSIs of the size of, like, L&T and stuff. So, how do you suggest the small startups who are just in beginning stage can, you know, participate in such tenders?
I can say 2 things, and I would say you can also talk to Ayushi. Ayushi, you can raise your hand. She's a small startup who is working with National Highway Authority of India. But a lot of these tenders lately have a Startup India exemption, where you can, as a startup, you don't have to prove your turnover. And you can, I think you get a lot of these exceptions, which would have otherwise eliminated you in the preliminary round itself. So a bunch of these exceptions are coming, but I would say you can get a reality check if you talk to Ayushi, who's here.